All right, let's hone in on this story now. Provisional taxpayers who file electronically have until Monday to complete their tax returns. The South African Revenue Service has extended the original deadline and has pushed the filing season, at least the closing date, to the 15th of February. Those who fail to comply with this date, we're told, will be hit with administrative penalties. To help us through this process, let's bring in SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter, who joins us now via our video line. Commissioner, thanks for your time and your indulgence. Welcome to the program. So much to talk about. Perhaps we can begin with what I've already alluded to. The filing season, meant to have ended in January, now is going to end in 2 days' time. It's an extension that I wonder whether you feel was worth it. Are you happy with what you're seeing?
Well, Ayanda, the reason we considered the extension was we were aware that at the time that we had originally scheduled the due date, that we were still in the thick of the second wave. We are aware of the lockdown restrictions and regulations, and generally it was just really an understanding that willing taxpayers who may want to comply but have been struggling to give them the extra period. Was it worthwhile? Well, even in the last 2 weeks, we have had several taxpayers making use of the extension. And so, yes, we do think it was worthwhile. However, having completed that now, we do intend to draw the line. And in the interest of honest taxpayers, we clearly have to impose the various sanctions on those who have not complied. I mean, to give you a sense we've received just over 3.6 million submissions. And we are thankful that many of that was taxpayers using our online channels. We've also been able to migrate almost 400,000 taxpayers from manual filing onto e-filing. Remember, we also introduced the additional functionalities so the taxpayers need not come into our branches. And we did that, of course, to help taxpayers manage the risk of transmission by not exposing themselves unnecessarily to physical visits, but also because it is in line with our long-term strategy increasingly to provide taxpayers with digital services.
Right. You speak about drawing a line after Monday, and that's an important statement because the implications could be far-reaching, not least of which because last month the president actually signed into law new regulations around taxation in the country. Among the changes is if there are errors in your taxes, so to speak, you could face penalties and possibly imprisonment. Talk us through that. On the face of it, it appears a bit overhanded.
It is actually it was an anomaly that in normal legal frameworks, breaking the law or not complying with the law unwittingly is no defense. Which means that if you commit a crime and you were not aware of the law, it is no defense afterwards to say, I did not know. Now, the regularization of the tax law has just followed that basic principle. Notwithstanding that, it's important for taxpayers to ensure that they fulfill their obligations as the law requires. Now, SARS goes out of its way to clarify what the obligations are for taxpayers. Taxpayers can also, and in fact, for taxpayers who have standard incomes, people who may not necessarily be high salary earners, middle income earners, their obligation is simple enough that they need not have legal advice. Most of the deductions is done through the payroll system. And in fact, you may recall that of the 3.5 million taxpayers that we introduced auto-assessment to this year, more than half of those taxpayers accepted the return, and up to 76% of them ultimately accepted the return that we gave them with some doing some editing. And editing means maybe you've had a deduction or medical aid claim or travel log that you wanted to share with us. So let me just say, first of all, for standard taxpayers, this is a very low risk. And even where taxpayers feel that it is a risk, they're welcome to come to SARS and we will help them in that regard to complete their obligations.
Right.
For businesses, they generally work with advisors and intermediaries. So I think it may be making a mountain out of a molehill, because all we are simply saying is it remains the obligation of the taxpayer to ensure that they fulfill those obligations lawfully. And if they need clarity or help, we are willing to do so.
So, in other words, you don't imagine anybody finding themselves behind bars because they made a mistake in their SARS returns. Am I taking it a bit too far here?
I would be very surprised if salary income earners find themselves in that situation. On the other hand, if anyone seeks to deliberately fiddle with their taxes, and we detect that and we notice this, there's two things. First of all, there's obviously what we call administrative, sometimes just people making a simple mistake. And invariably, our first response would be to help people fix those mistakes. We'll ask for additional information. We'll ask, have you made the correct disclosures? When people continue to deliberately and willfully either provide us with incorrect information or fraudulent information, then clearly they have to answer to the law.
Fair enough. What many people might also miss is that SARS is actually requesting some taxpayers to disclose any information regarding cryptocurrency trade and purchases. What would you say is the takeaway here? And are you happy with the level of compliance you're seeing with that aspect of the information you need?
I think we have a long way to go. So SARS actually introduced a clarity statement on cryptocurrencies a few years ago. It's a new phenomenon. Many people don't understand it. Many people are speculative in it. They're experimenting. But what we have said this year is we now want to increase the focus on cryptocurrencies. We are creating the opportunity for taxpayers to disclose any acquisition or trading in cryptocurrencies. And again, it's a reasonable request, inviting taxpayers to close. And our approach has always been, if you come to us rather than us finding you, we will be more in a mindset to try and help you to comply. When SARS comes and discovers on doing an audit, and having access to financial records that you have willfully not disclosed it, then again, the same legal principle of consequence applies.
And how has the introduction of cryptocurrency complicated the work you do? It wasn't a problem a few years ago. And already there's such interesting discussions in the public domain about the threats that cryptocurrency is having on traditional currencies like the rand, the dollar, whatever the case may be. Has that muddied the waters for you too as the Revenue Service?
So most taxpayers, as they would acquire any other asset, would have to acquire a cryptocurrency asset through a financial institution. I can't meet you in a cafe and say, listen, here's a Bitcoin for you, give me, $48,000 and we'll swap Bitcoins. You actually have to, there's a fairly well documented trail of evidence when you acquire. So most of the banks where taxpayers would have used to acquire cryptocurrency would have a record of that acquisition. And we have access to those bank records and accounts. Once a taxpayer has acquired an asset, then they may trade an asset, or they may hold it and sell it. And in that regard, the same laws that applies to the acquisition and trading of any other financial asset, whether it is securities, a share on the stock market, or any other assets, the normal tax rules applies to cryptocurrencies as it would to any other currencies. And I think that's where we ask for the disclosures. At the moment, some of the exchanges that individuals may use to do cryptocurrency trading once you have acquired it may not be as accessible to institutions such as the Reserve Bank or SARS or other law enforcement agencies, such as the stock exchange, the alt exchange, and other asset registers maybe. So that's an area of work where we have to step up so that we can also, as we have access to other forms of asset acquisitions, trading, buying and selling, that we're able to do so the same. So for now, we are asking taxpayers to disclose that. And as we would ask them to disclose, when required, any other aspects that may relate to their balance sheet. Remember, traditionally, SARS looks at your income statement, but SARS may also ask you for a balance sheet.
Important clarity.
Which is a statement, which is a statement of assets and liabilities, as opposed to an income statement.
Right. Our conversation would be incomplete without trying to understand the impact that COVID-19 is continuously having on the Revenue Service. With your indulgence, we'll continue with that aspect of the conversation when we come back. Please stay with us. And we're in conversation with the SARS Commissioner Edward Kieswetter. Various things to be ventilated as we count down 2 days to the closing of the season, so to speak, for you to file your returns. There are various implications if you don't do that correctly, but also in the backdrop, of course, we are dealing with a global health crisis that's had devastating effects on virtually all aspects of our lives. The question now is, how are things panning out for SARS? Mr. Kieswetter, thanks very much for staying on with us and for your continued indulgence. So there's a general feeling, I would say, that SARS is working a whole lot more smoother than it has over the past couple of years. I wonder whether, you still feel that things have changed quick enough for us to meet our targets soon enough. How confident are you feeling that targets for the 2020-2021 financial season will be met? Yeah, there you go.
So let me just leave the target for now, because there's no such thing as a target. I'll come to that in a moment. But your first point about SARS working smoother, COVID in regards to our modernization has been both a burden and a blessing. From a perspective of burden, we obviously had to step in to facilitate a process that would make it possible for taxpayers to remain compliant, because that's very important, without exposing them to risk, but also to accommodate an understanding that taxpayers would actually be battling. You know that the economy, the numbers will come out now, so I won't delve into the numbers, but there has been a significant decline year on year in the economy. We see a little bit of a recovery now. In 2 weeks' time, when the minister gives the budget speech, we'll put in more dimension to that. But just from a trend perspective, a few things happened that accommodated taxpayers. First of all, there was about 19 tax relief measures. You will recall, I won't go into the detail now, that the president announced and SARS administered. And those relief measures provided some form of deferment without penalties for taxpayers to fulfill their payment obligations. We asked them to continue their filing obligations, but we gave a space and room for people to do, mindful of their cash flow challenges. The second thing was, in the first 100 days, SARS built 30 additional online applications. We introduced a branch visit system by appointment only, and we converted effectively our entire contact center to be able to work virtually. In other words, our own staff, we stepped up from about 15% of staff enabled to work remotely to over 90% of our staff can now work remotely. So yes, we have done a lot. We don't declare victory yet. We still have many challenges, but we have done a significant amount to balance the risk of infection and transmission with the need for compliance and revenue collection. That was always in the back of our mind. On the actual revenue achievement, Ayanda, you must remember that revenue is simply a reflection of the state of the economy. In a good economy, we'll have more revenue. In a declining economy, you'll have revenue challenges. So the minister sets a revenue estimate at the beginning of the year, and he adjusts that on two occasions, in the October and February, as those assumptions pan out. So we've become kind of colloquially referenced it as a target, but it is an estimate based on certain assumptions. When those assumptions don't manifest, the actual revenue collection will be different. And in this year, you will recall in October, the minister said that we will be down year on year by about 313 billion rand. And that was because we saw a contraction in the economy of between 7 and 8%. Now, when the contraction is less than that, you should expect a little bit more revenue. When the contraction is worse than that, you should expect a little bit less revenue. And where we have seen is a little bit of a recovery, as we have announced in our January numbers, which shows that the contraction may not be quite as bad as we wanted, but it certainly won't be back to 2019 levels.
Right.
So the revenue that we will collect this year will definitely be significantly less than what we collected in the prior year. The other indicator, I think, that when we announce the revenue results, and you and I, I'm sure, will talk about this after the minister made his budget announcement, in fact, after the year end, the real indicator of the successful collection will be a correlation between growth in the economy and growth in the tax revenue. So if the economy, if the revenue collection has grown a little bit faster than what the economy has grown, or in this case, when it contracts a little bit less than what the economy has contracted, we would consider it to have been an effective revenue collection year, such as we had last year.
Yeah. I mean, the thread you connect between economic growth and how much revenue we actually have is pretty clear to me, but would you agree that's part of the story? Another aspect is whether or not we have the kind of management processes that allow for all the tax to be collected to actually be collected. Are you worried about that? Especially because in the backdrop, again, South Africans really being accustomed to the ways through which money intended for certain purposes simply isn't used for that.
I mean, absolutely. There are three things. When you hear us talk about revenue, there are three driving forces. The one is the economy, and obviously the tax policy or instruments that we impose on the economy exacts a theoretical number. But the other two things that you mentioned is, the first is SARS's capacity, the way it thinks about and the way it executes its work is an important driver of the quality of revenue collection and compliance improvement. And then the third important bubble is the social contract that society, and in particular taxpayers, has with the state, the government. When taxpayers drop their confidence in government, when they see the wholesale corruption, I mean, we saw again the tragedy of PPE procurement, where there are, you can't call them anything other than government officials who collaborate with private agents to steal, to defraud the state when they are supposed to procure. And in this case, tragically procuring goods and services meant to manage the health crisis of COVID. Now, when you see that, the public feel morally justified to withhold some of those taxes and to fiddle with it. We would obviously argue that you can't respond to one crime by committing a crime yourself. That's also not morally justifiable. So let me take on the first two. The SARS systems, we are working hard. We have started the rebuilding process and the modernization 20 months ago, but we have a long way to go. We are still struggling to attract good, solid skills that we need in highly specialized audit areas and investigating areas and forensic areas, but also increasingly we need skills in data science, artificial intelligence, and technology systems. And so our journey is going to take a few years to build that capacity, but we are beginning to see small green shoots that are encouraging. And when we announce our results, we'll share more detail around that. On the society side, there it is beyond SARS only. There it is the whole of government that must build and earn the trust of the South African public. We will work hard to root out corruption in our own system. Our staff knows that we will not tolerate any of them. And again, in this past year, we have dismissed and prosecuted some of our own staff who are found to be colluding with taxpayers. We'll continue to drive that. But it is up to the whole of government, the whole system. The integrity of the system must improve. Our president is clear in his State of the Nation address a few days ago that corruption remains one of the most deeply corrosive factors that limits economic growth, but more importantly, that destroys the social fiber of South Africa. Yeah. And this will have long-term consequences, not just for tax revenue, but just for the overall civil quality of the civil society we have. If the social compact is broken, every aspect of a society will suffer.
Absolutely. And, you know, the president really spent a lot of time on his State of the Nation address, ironically, last year, speaking about social compacts. But you referenced staff. Morale in the staff cohort at SARS had, in previous weeks, months, years, been cited as part of the reasons why things weren't working as they should. Are you in a position to share with us how well you feel things are now? I mean, is this a threat to the Commission's, is this a threat to SARS's own auditing processes and the consequent management that still needs to take place within the Revenue Service?
So let me give you a quick high-level recap, but also state up front, Ayanda, this is a journey. And the hardest thing to fix in any organization is not the technology, the nuts and the bolts. It's the hearts and the minds of people. It's the value system, it's the ethos. And we've set clear parameters of what leadership ethos, what leadership model we have. As the CEO, I drive that personally, and I work with the top, directly with the top 80 to 100 leaders to ensure they are clear what's the acceptable behavior, and we invest in them, we work with them. Just this past week, I spent the best part of Wednesday conducting a leadership conversation and building leadership muscle. You'll also recall that we have parted ways with some of the leaders who were pointed out by the Nugent Commission as having compromised themselves, wittingly or unwittingly, by association with some of the work that had happened since 2014. So that act has been taken decisively, and therefore no one should even imagine we will tolerate anything but the highest level of competence and an aligned leadership to the higher purpose that we stand for. On the staffing side, we have started engaging with staff. Before COVID, I visited about 90% of our staff on the ground, listening to them and responding to the concerns they've had. We have started a listening campaign where I have appointed an independent person that we have brought in on a short-term basis that staff can go to if they have a concern. We have done significant work about a reparation process for employees who, for one or other reason, may have felt that they were directly affected and disadvantaged during that period. This is also an important journey because, let's be fair, you know, some people who have left SARS have left of their own accord. Some of them who have been disciplined ought to have been disciplined, but there are those who can rightfully claim that they may have become victims of the dynamic at the time. So that journey is continuing. Very soon, I'll be making an announcement about appointing a panel of eminent legal minds to help me deal with one important aspect that we believe has been the most significant compromise of a number of employees, and we'll deal with that in the next quarter. But yes, it's a continuous journey of earning and building trust, and our staff have the right to expect us to act with integrity, to act honestly, and to do our best. And we cannot demand trust, we have to earn it.
Absolutely, and that is true across the board, I'm sure you'll admit. Very quickly before I have to let you go, the ban on alcohol sales, cigarette sales, etc., it's often been the amount of revenue that would have sort of been accrued from that has been thrown around in the debate around whether or not that sort of ban should exist as we continue the fight against COVID-19. Your reading of the situation of how much of a dent it's had on our revenue collection?
Ayanda, just on a lighter note, I'm always amazed how we are so focused on alcohol in our South.
You and me both, to be very honest.
We've never complained that pharmacies close at 6 o'clock or at 8 o'clock, but we complain we can't buy booze. But anyway, I guess, they say if your favorite sport team wins, you drink to celebrate victory, and if they lose, you drink to drown your sorrows, I guess. But on a more serious note, obviously, the contraction or the restriction on the sale and movement of alcohol and tobacco products have clearly had a number of implications. On the unfortunate side, it has caused the proliferation and the embedding of illicit trade, because throughout the lockdown period, cigarettes was available and alcohol was available. If you were prepared to pay the price and to deal with shady operators, you never had to go dry. And that's the unfortunate part of it, because this will cost years of working to root out these corrupt, unscrupulous operators who have abused this time to embed themselves, to build their brands, and to build a new client base. On the revenue side, whilst it was understandable that the health reasons necessitated these restrictions, we have had on excise duties and also on some of the other taxes, because remember, these operators, the wineries, the liquor outlets, they also pay other taxes from the sale and the activities that they have. So we have made the number publicly before that we estimate the revenue compromise from that for this year will be around about 14-15 billion rand.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. This was an important conversation and a conversation worth having slowly with clarity. So really appreciate your indulgence this Saturday morning here on Newsroom Africa. SARS Commissioner there, Edward Kieswetter, joining us via our video line.